I'm Margaret, 38 female. I live in a quiet suburban town where the biggest news is usually a bake sale at the local elementary school. For 15 years, my life was just as quiet and predictable. I work as an archivist for the County Historical Society, a job I love for its order and its respect for the past. My husband, Julian, and I lived in a beautiful home he designed and built himself, a testament to his skill as a custom home builder. It was our fortress, our shared history written in wood and stone. But I'm here to tell you how that fortress was built on a foundation of lies, and how I had to watch it all burn to the ground to finally see the truth. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. Life with Julian had always felt solid, dependable. He was the kind of man who commanded a room without raising his voice, his confidence a warm blanket I'd wrapped myself in since we were in our early 20s. He was the dreamer, the builder. I was the preserver, the keeper of records. We were a perfect pair, or so I believed. Our home was his masterpiece, a sprawling two-story craftsman with a wide porch and deep eaves. Every beam, every joint was a symbol of his love for us. I spent my days organizing the pasts of strangers, and my evenings in a home I thought would be my future forever. The cracks in that foundation began to appear so subtly that I dismissed them as the normal settling of a long-term marriage. About 6 months before the fire, Julian became distant. He was stressed, he said, about a new development project that was hitting regulatory snags. As a custom home builder, his income could be feast or famine, and he'd been banking on this project to carry us through the next year. He'd come home late, smelling of expensive whiskey and a faint, unfamiliar perfume I naively chalked up to a client or a real estate agent. He'd stare at his laptop for hours, his jaw tight, snapping at me if I asked what was wrong. "It's just work, Maggie," he'd say, a dismissive wave of his hand ending the conversation. "You wouldn't understand the pressure." I tried to be supportive. I made his favorite meals, kept the house an oasis of calm, and didn't press him for details. I trusted him. That was my first and biggest mistake. The trust I had in him was the load-bearing wall of our marriage, and without it, the whole structure was doomed. One Saturday afternoon about a month before the fire, I found him in the den, the room where we kept our shared desk and financial records. He had the cover off an electrical outlet, a pair of pliers in his hand. "What are you doing?" I asked, leaning against the doorframe. "Just fixing this outlet," he said, not looking up. "It's been flickering when I plug in the big printer. Faulty wiring. Don't want a fire hazard." I remember thinking it was odd. Julian hadn't done handyman work on our house in years. He always hired one of his subcontractors for minor fixes, claiming he was too busy. But I just smiled and said, "My hero," and went to make some iced tea. I didn't see the small, unlabeled can of solvent sitting half-hidden in his toolbox. A week later, the topic of insurance came up. We received a renewal notice for our homeowner's policy in the mail. I put it on his side of the desk, as he always handled the major finances. That evening, he brought it up. "Hey, about the insurance," he said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "The premiums went up again. It's robbery. I'm going to shop around, find a better deal. I'll cancel the current one tomorrow and have a new policy in place by the end of the week. Don't worry about it, I'll handle it." It sounded responsible. It sounded like the Julian I had always known, the man who took care of things. I nodded, thanked him, and thought nothing more of it. Why would I? We had never missed a payment on anything in our entire lives. He said he would handle it, and I believed him. I didn't know he was handling me, setting the stage for his final act. He was carefully removing the safety net, ensuring that when we fell, there would be nothing left to catch us. The final week before the fire was strangely calm. Julian was more affectionate than he had been in months. He brought me flowers, suggested we go out to our favorite restaurant, and spoke about a vacation we could take once his big project was sorted out. He was lulling me into a false sense of security, making sure I was looking the other way. He was the arsonist laying the kindling, and he was doing it with a smile and a kiss. The night of the fire, he suggested we watch a movie in the living room. He made popcorn and poured us both a glass of wine. As we sat on the couch, the opening credits rolling, he got a text. It's my foreman, he said, standing up. Some issue with a delivery for Monday. I need to take this. He went out to the porch, leaving his phone on the coffee table. 5 minutes later, I smelled it. A faint, acrid smell, like burning plastic. I paused the movie and called out his name. No answer. I stood up, my heart starting to beat a little faster. The smell was stronger now, coming from the direction of the den. I walked down the hall and saw a thin curl of gray smoke seeping from under the door. I threw the door open and was met with a wall of heat and a terrifying sight. Flames were climbing the wall, originating from the very outlet Julian had been fixing. The room was already a furnace, the old wooden desk and shelves of books catching fire with an audible roar. I screamed his name, my voice raw with panic. Suddenly, he was behind me, grabbing my arm. "We have to get out, now," he yelled, his voice a theatrical performance of shock and fear. He pulled me toward the front door, away from the flames. As we stumbled out onto the front lawn, the cool night air hitting my face, I looked back at our house. The fire was spreading with unnatural speed, the orange glow visible in every window. Julian was already on the phone, dialing 911, his voice tight with feigned panic. I stood there, wrapped in a blanket he'd grabbed on the way out, watching 15 years of my life turn to smoke and ash. And through the haze of my shock and grief, one thought kept nagging at me. His phone, the one he'd left on the coffee table, was now clutched tightly in his hand. He hadn't gone back inside for it. He'd had it with him on the porch the entire time. The sound of sirens grew from a distant wail to a deafening shriek that seemed to tear the quiet night apart. Fire trucks, their lights painting our peaceful street in frantic strokes of red and white, screeched to a halt in front of our burning home. Firefighters spilled out, a disciplined army moving with urgent purpose, uncoiling hoses and shouting commands. I stood frozen on the lawn, the scratchy wool of the blanket Julian had thrown over me a poor substitute for the sense of security that was now an inferno just yards away. The heat was immense, a physical force that pushed against my skin, and the roar of the flames was a living thing, consuming our shared memories with a terrifying hunger. Each shatter of a window, each crash of a collapsing beam, felt like a physical blow. Julian stood beside me, his arm around my shoulders in a gesture that should have been comforting but felt strangely hollow. He was playing the part of the devastated husband perfectly. He spoke to the first police officer on the scene, his voice cracking at all the right moments. "It happened so fast," he said, shaking his head. "We were just watching a movie. I smelled smoke, came from my office. I think it was the wiring. I was just working on an outlet in there last week, thought I fixed it." He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders heaving. It was a masterful performance. If I hadn't been drowning in my own shock, I might have applauded. Neighbors started to gather, their faces a mixture of horror and pity. They offered condolences, blankets, a place to stay. I could only nod, my throat too tight to speak. My mind was a chaotic slideshow of images. The photos on the mantelpiece, the books I loved, the antique chair I'd inherited from my grandmother. All of it gone. My best friend, Sarah, arrived in a flurry of gravel as her car skidded to a stop behind the emergency vehicles. She ran to me, her face pale with worry, and wrapped me in a hug that felt like the first real thing I had experienced in an hour. "Oh, Maggie," she whispered, holding me tight. "I'm so sorry. Are you okay?" I finally broke, the tears I'd been holding back coming in a flood of silent, racking sobs. Julian released me to her, patting my back awkwardly. "I need to talk to the fire chief," he said, his expression one of grim responsibility. He walked away, leaving me clinging to Sarah, and I watched him engage the man in charge, pointing toward the den, gesturing with his hands as he recounted his story of faulty wires and flickering lights. We spent what was left of the night at Sarah's house. She made me a cup of tea that I couldn't drink and sat with me on her couch, a silent, steady presence in the swirling chaos of my thoughts. Julian, meanwhile, was on the phone for hours in the guest room. I could hear his muffled voice through the door, a low, urgent murmur. He was talking to our insurance company, he said, starting the claims process. He sounded efficient, almost energized by the crisis. I was numb, adrift in a sea of loss, while he was already navigating the financial aftermath. "He's a rock," Sarah said quietly, trying to comfort me. "He's handling everything." I nodded, but a cold unease was beginning to settle in my stomach. His grief felt performed. His efficiency felt predatory. When he finally emerged from the room, his face was set in a mask of tired debt. Ermination. Okay, he said, sitting down opposite us. I've started the ball rolling. They'll send an investigator out in the morning. It's a total loss, of course. They said the preliminary claim should be straightforward since it was clearly an electrical fire. He looked at me, his eyes searching for a reaction. We'll get through this, Maggie. We'll rebuild, bigger and better. Bigger and better. Our home was still a smoldering ruin, the air for miles thick with the stench of its demise, and he was already talking about a new construction project. He spoke of it not as a tragedy, but as an opportunity. The next morning, we returned to the house, or what was left of it. It was a skeletal wreck, a blackened husk silhouetted against a gray, unforgiving sky. Yellow tape cordoned off the property. A man in a heavy coat and boots was already there, picking through the debris with a long metal tool. This was the investigator Julian had mentioned. Julian approached him with an outstretched hand and a somber expression. "Julian Croft," he said. "The owner. This is my wife, Margaret. Anything you need, just let us know." The investigator nodded curtly, his eyes scanning the ruin. "Just doing an initial survey," he said. "Standard procedure." I couldn't bring myself to get any closer. I stood at the curb, staring at the charred remains of the front porch, the place where we'd sat on countless summer evenings. Sarah stayed by my side, her hand a reassuring weight on my arm. Julian, however, seemed drawn to the wreckage. He walked the perimeter with the investigator, pointing to the den, explaining his theory about the faulty wiring with the confidence of an expert. He was the builder, after all. He knew how a house was put together, and I was beginning to suspect how it could be taken apart. He was selling his story and selling it hard. As the day wore on, the reality of our situation began to sink in. We had nothing left but the clothes on our backs. Julian made more calls to the bank, to credit card companies. He seemed to have a checklist, a methodical approach to disaster that felt chillingly practiced. I, on the other hand, could barely function. Every decision felt monumental. Sarah had to gently guide me through the basics, calling my boss at the Historical Society to tell her what happened, figuring out where we would stay. "You can stay with me for as long as you need," she insisted. Julian readily agreed. "That would be great, Sarah, just until the insurance money comes through and we can get a long-term rental." The insurance money. Everything came back to the insurance money. It was the solution to everything, the light at the end of this dark, smoky tunnel. For Julian, the fire wasn't the end of our life together. It was a transaction. And as I stood there watching him orchestrate the aftermath, a horrifying thought began to form in my mind, a thought so monstrous I tried to push it away. This wasn't a tragedy. It was a plan. The days following the fire were a blur of bureaucratic nightmares and suffocating grief. We were refugees in Sarah's guest room, surrounded by her kindness but feeling utterly displaced. I walked around in a fog, trying to complete the grim checklist of loss, cancel the utilities, report my driver's license as destroyed, try to remember what irreplaceable things were gone forever. Julian, on the other hand, remained a whirlwind of activity. He was constantly on the phone, his voice a low, urgent hum of claim numbers and policy details. He seemed frustrated, agitated. "They're dragging their feet," he'd complain after hanging up. "So much red tape. You'd think for the premiums we pay, they'd be more responsive." His frustration felt different from my sorrow. Mine was a deep, hollow ache. His was the impatience of a man waiting for a delayed payment. About a week after the fire, I got the call that changed everything. I was sitting at Sarah's kitchen table, staring blankly at a pile of insurance forms when my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. "Is this Margaret Croft?" a man's voice asked. It was calm and professional. "Yes, this is she." "Mrs. Croft, this is Investigator Davies. I'm the lead arson investigator with the County Fire Marshal's office. I was assigned to your case." My stomach tightened. Arson investigator? I thought this was just a standard fire investigator. The term felt heavy, accusatory. "Oh, hello," I managed to say. "My husband said he spoke to someone at the scene." "He did. I just have a few follow-up questions if you have a moment. It would be better to speak in person. Would you be available to meet me at my office this afternoon? Is there a problem? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. There was a slight pause on the other end. We've received the lab results from the samples taken from your home. There are some things I need to discuss with you, and it would be best if you came alone. Ka. Me alone? The words echoed in my head. Why would he want to speak to me without Julian? A cold dread washed over me, so intense it was dizzying. I agreed to meet him at 2 o'clock and hung up the phone, my hand trembling. When Julian came into the kitchen a few minutes later, I said nothing about the call. I simply told him I was going out to run some errands and buy some clothes, a plausible excuse given we had none. He barely looked up from his laptop, just grunted in acknowledgement. Driving to the fire marshal's office, my mind raced. What could the lab results have shown? What did Investigator Davies want that he couldn't ask in front of my husband? Investigator Davies was a man in his late 40s with tired eyes that had seen too much. His office was small, cluttered with files and diagrams of burn patterns. He offered me a bottle of water and got straight to the point. "Mrs. Croft," he began, his voice gentle but firm. "When we investigate a fire, especially one with this level of destruction, we look for the origin and cause. Your husband was very clear in his statement that he believed the fire was caused by faulty wiring at an outlet in the den." "Yes," I said. "He was having trouble with it. He tried to fix it himself a few weeks ago." Davies nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on me. He slid a folder across the desk. He opened it to a lab report, a page filled with chemical formulas and technical jargon. He pointed to a highlighted line. "Our canine units alerted us to the presence of an accelerant near the point of origin. The lab confirmed it. We found trace amounts of kerosene residue in the drywall and on the floorboards directly around that outlet." Kerosene, the word hung in the air between us, thick and suffocating. I don't understand," I stammered. "We don't own any kerosene. We don't have a kerosene heater, nothing like that." "I'm aware," he said. "Accelerants like kerosene aren't just lying around most homes. They have to be introduced to a scene. They're used to make a fire start faster and burn hotter than it normally would. An electrical fire from a faulty outlet has a very distinct burn pattern. Your fire did not have that pattern." He let the information sink in. My mind flashed back to that Saturday afternoon, to Julian in the den with his toolbox. I remembered seeing a small, unmarked metal can. A can of solvent, I'd thought, or a can of kerosene. "Now for the other reason I asked you here," Davies continued, his tone shifting. "As part of our standard investigation, we verify the insurance status of the property. I called your insurance company this morning to get a copy of the policy for our records." He paused, and his tired eyes were filled with something I could only describe as pity. "Mrs. Croft, your husband, Julian Croft, called and canceled your homeowner's insurance policy 6 days before the fire. The policy was not active on the night of the incident. There is no insurance money." The air left my lungs in a silent rush. The room tilted. No insurance. He had canceled it. The endless phone calls, the feigned frustration with the red tape, the talk of rebuilding bigger and better, it was all a lie, a performance for my benefit. He wasn't waiting for a delayed payment. He was waiting for me to stop asking questions. He hadn't just burned down our house. He had burned down our entire life, our future, and left us with absolutely nothing but the ashes. The cold dread in my stomach had now crystallized into a shard of ice. "He told me he was shopping for a better deal," I whispered, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "He said he would handle it." "There is no new policy, Mrs. Croft. There's nothing." Investigator Davies leaned forward. "Your husband has a background as a builder. He knows about wiring. He also knows how to make a fire look like an accident. A man cancels his fire insurance on a multi-million-dollar home, and a week later it burns to the ground in a fire that shows signs of an accelerant at the exact spot he was supposedly fixing. That's not a coincidence." My shock was rapidly being replaced by a cold, clear rage. Julian hadn't just made a mistake. He had done this. He had planned this. He had stood beside me, his arm around my shoulders, and watched our life burn, knowing he was the one who had lit the match. He had intended to leave me with nothing, perhaps hoping the insurance payout would be his golden parachute into a new life. But he had made a mistake. He had underestimated the investigation. Or perhaps he had simply underestimated me. I looked at Investigator Davies, the fog in my mind finally gone, replaced by a terrible, sharp clarity. "What do you need from me?" I asked, my voice steady for the first time in a week. I left Investigator Davies' office in a daze, his words replaying in my mind. No insurance. Kerosene. He did this. The rage that had flickered to life in his office was now a controlled, cold burn in my chest. Julian hadn't just betrayed me, he had tried to utterly destroy me, to leave me destitute and homeless while he, presumably, walked away with. What? That was the question. If there was no insurance money, what was his motive? What was the endgame? The whole drive back to Sarah's house, I pieced it together. The late nights, the secretive phone calls, the scent of another woman's perfume. This wasn't just about a fire. The fire was just a symptom of a much deeper disease. When I walked through Sarah's front door, she took one look at my face and knew something was terribly wrong. My manufactured composure had crumbled, and my expression was a mask of cold fury. "Maggie, what is it? What happened?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. I led her to the kitchen table, the same table where I had been staring at useless forms just hours before. I told her everything. I told her about Investigator Davies, the term arson investigator, the lab report, the kerosene. And then I delivered the final, devastating blow. "He canceled the insurance, Sarah, a week before the fire. There's no money, there's nothing." Sarah, a forensic accountant who spent her days untangling the most complex financial deceptions, stared at me, her professional calm warring with her personal horror. She was silent for a full minute, processing the sheer malice of it all. That is evil," she finally said, her voice low and seething. "That is the act of a monster." "He's been playing me for a fool," I said, the words feeling like stones in my mouth. "His frustration with the insurance company, it was all an act. He needed me to believe there was a payout coming to keep me from asking the right questions." "Okay," Sarah said, her demeanor shifting. Her friendly concern was replaced by the sharp focus of a predator on the hunt. "Okay, so there's no insurance payout. That means the fire wasn't the goal. The fire was a means to an end. It was a smokescreen to cover something else. We need to find out what." She stood up and went to her home office, returning with her work laptop. She placed it on the table between us. "You and Julian have joint bank accounts, right? Credit cards?" I nodded. "I know all the passwords. He never thought I paid attention to the finances, so he never bothered to change them." "Good," she said, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "Let's follow the money. Money doesn't lie, it tells a story, and I have a feeling Julian's story is a very ugly one." For the next several hours, we dove into the digital records of our 15-year marriage. It was like an archaeological dig, peeling back the layers of our life and finding rot and decay beneath the surface. The first thing we found was the debt. Julian's business, which I always thought was thriving, was hemorrhaging money. A major development project he'd been counting on had fallen through months ago, but he'd never told me. Instead, he had been taking out high-interest business loans, juggling payments, and slowly draining our personal savings to keep his company afloat. He had leveraged our home to secure one of the loans. With the house gone, the bank would come calling, but the debt would likely be written off in the chaos. The fire was his escape hatch from financial ruin, but that was only part of the story. The real betrayal was in the credit card statements. For the past 6 months, there were charges I didn't recognize. Extravagant dinners at restaurants we had never been to. Purchases from high-end boutiques. Hotel rooms in the city on nights he was supposedly working late at a job site. And then we found her. There were repeated payments, thousands of dollars at a time, funneled through a payment app to a single name, Vanessa Dubois. "Who is Vanessa Dubois?" Sarah asked, her voice tight. I typed the name into a search engine. The first result was a sleek, professional website for an interior designer. Her portfolio was filled with photos of minimalist, expensive-looking homes. Her About Me page featured a glamorous headshot of a beautiful woman in her late 20s with bright, ambitious eyes. Her list of recent collaborations included Croft Custom Homes. Julian. She was one of his contractors. The unfamiliar perfume, the late nights, the financial drain, it all clicked into place. He wasn't just in debt. He was having an affair. He was funding a whole separate life with our money. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when Sarah, using her forensic accounting skills to dig deeper, found it, a hidden savings account in Julian's name only. He'd been siphoning money into it for months, small amounts at first, then larger and larger cash withdrawals from our joint accounts that he'd passed off as material costs for his projects. The account had a balance of nearly $200,000. He hadn't just been trying to escape debt. He had been building a nest egg. A getaway fund, with the house gone and the debts likely to be discharged, he could take that money and disappear, starting a new life with his younger, more glamorous partner. He was going to leave me literally standing in the ashes with nothing. Sarah found one last thing, a recent transaction from that secret account, a $20,000 down payment wired to a real estate agency in Arizona. She cross-referenced the agency with Vanessa's social media, which wasn't private. Her recent posts were all about her love for the desert, with hashtags like New Beginnings and Desert Life. She had even posted a picture 2 weeks ago, clinking champagne glasses with a man whose face was out of frame, but whose wrist featured the distinctive watch I had given Julian for our 10th anniversary. The caption read, "Closing on our dream home soon, our dream home." He was using the money he'd stolen from me to build a new dream home with someone else. He hadn't just planned to leave me. He had planned to replace me, to erase me completely. I looked at Sarah, the evidence of Julian's monstrous betrayal glowing on the laptop screen. The grief and shock were gone now, burned away by the cold, hard fury of the truth. He had written a blueprint for my destruction. Now, it was time for me to draw up one of my own. The plan began to form that night in the quiet hum of Sarah's home office. We had the truth, a tangled web of financial deceit, infidelity, and criminal intent. But the truth wasn't enough. Julian was a charismatic liar, a man skilled at building convincing facades. If we simply handed our findings over to Investigator Davies, Julian would lawyer up, deny everything, and try to paint me as a scorned, vengeful wife. He would twist the narrative. He was the builder, after all. He knew how to frame things to his advantage. No, I couldn't just give them the evidence. I needed to give them Julian himself. I needed a confession. "He thinks he's the smartest person in every room," I said to Sarah, a newfound steel in my voice. "His arrogance is his biggest weakness. He's so sure he's gotten away with this that he won't see it coming." Sarah nodded, her forensic accountant mind already working on the strategy. "We need to control the environment," she said. "We need to back him into a corner where the only way out is through the truth. We need to strip away his lies, one by one, until he has nothing left to hide behind." Our mission for the next 48 hours was to build an airtight case. We were no longer just victims of his scheme, we were the architects of his downfall. As an archivist, I knew how to organize information, how to build a narrative from disparate pieces of evidence. And Sarah, she knew how to make that evidence sing. We printed everything. The bank statements showing the cash withdrawals and transfers to his secret account, the credit card bills with the incriminating charges, the wire transfer confirmation for the down payment on the house in Arizona. We created a timeline, meticulously linking his business trips to hotel stays with Vanessa. We downloaded and printed photos from Vanessa's social media. The champagne toast with his watch clearly visible, her posts about a new life in the desert. We even found the public listing for the house they were buying, a sprawling modern home with a pool and a view of the mountains. The centerpiece of our evidence was the insurance cancellation notice. I had called the insurance company myself, pretending to be a confused wife just following up on the claim. A sympathetic agent had emailed me a copy of the cancellation confirmation, complete with the timestamp of Julian's phone call. It was dated 6 days before the fire. It was the smoking gun, and it had his name all over it. While we assembled our dossier, I maintained a careful charade with Julian. I played the part of the grieving, broken wife, too lost in my sorrow to be suspicious. I was quiet, withdrawn, and compliant. I let him continue his performance of the frustrated husband, battling with the intransigent insurance company. He would vent to me in the evenings about the incompetent claims adjusters, and I would nod and murmur sympathetically, all the while feeling a growing contempt. He was so confident in his deception, so wrapped up in his own cleverness, that he couldn't see the shift in my eyes from grief to calculation. The day we chose for the confrontation was a Thursday. Julian had a meeting in the morning with a potential investor for a new project, a fiction he'd created to explain his frequent absences. I knew he was really meeting with Vanessa to finalize their escape plan. This gave Sarah and me the morning to set the stage. Sarah arranged for a notary public to be on standby. My plan required a legally binding document. Then, I called Investigator Davies. "I think he's going to confess," I said, my voice steady, "but he'll only do it if he feels trapped. I'm going to confront him this evening at Sarah's house. I need you to be ready. Davy." Ease was skeptical at first, warning me about the dangers of confronting a man like Julian, but I was resolute. "He won't hurt me," I said. "His weakness isn't violence, it's his ego. I'm not going to accuse him. I'm going to make him condemn himself." I explained my plan. I would get him to talk, and Sarah would be in the next room with her phone on a video call to me, recording the entire conversation. The evidence would be irrefutable. Davies agreed to wait nearby. He would not intervene unless I gave a prearranged signal, ensuring that the confession would be obtained without any appearance of police coercion. When Julian came home that evening, he was in a good mood, almost buoyant. His meeting must have gone well. He probably thought his new life was just around the corner. "Good news," he announced, kissing my cheek with a casualness that made my skin crawl. "I think I've lined up the funding for a new development. We'll be back on our feet in no time, Maggie." "That's wonderful, Julian," I said, my voice quiet. "Can we talk for a minute? There are some things I don't understand." I led him to the living room. On the coffee table, I had laid out a single piece of paper, face down. Sarah's door was slightly ajar, a phone lens peeking through the crack. "What's this about?" he asked, his smile faltering slightly as he sensed the shift in the atmosphere. "It's about the insurance," I began, my heart pounding but my voice even. "I called them today, Julian, just to check on the status. They told me something strange. They told me you canceled the policy." I watched his face. For a split second, a flicker of pure panic crossed his eyes before being replaced by a mask of weary exasperation. "Oh, for God's sake, Maggie. Is that what this is about? It's a mix-up. A clerical error. I was switching providers, remember? The new policy must not have been processed before the old one was canceled. It's a bureaucratic mess. I'm handling it." It was a plausible lie, delivered with the perfect amount of annoyance, but I was ready for it. "Okay," I said calmly. "If it's just a clerical error, then you won't mind signing this." I turned over the paper on the coffee table. It was a sworn affidavit I'd had Sarah's legal contacts draft that morning. It stated, in clear legal language, that Julian Croft had not intentionally canceled the insurance policy, that he was the victim of an administrative error by the insurance company, and that he intended to sue them for the full value of our home plus damages for their negligence. "The notary is waiting down the street," I said. "If you sign this, we can take it to a lawyer first thing in the morning. We can fight them together." I watched the color drain from his face. He stared at the document as if it were a coiled snake. He couldn't sign it. That would be perjury, and he would be tangling himself in a legal battle he couldn't win. He couldn't refuse to sign it, because an innocent man would be eager to sue the company that had made such a catastrophic error. I had him. The frame was built. All he had to do was walk into it. Julian stared at the affidavit on the coffee table, his mind clearly racing, searching for an escape route. The confident, charming facade he had worn for months was beginning to crack, revealing the panicked schemer underneath. He looked from the paper to my face, his eyes narrowed, finally realizing this was not a conversation, it was an interrogation. "This is ridiculous, Maggie," he said, his voice attempting to sound dismissive but edged with a new tremor of fear. "We don't need this. I'm already handling it with the company. A lawyer will just complicate things." "How?" I asked, my voice genuinely curious. "How will a lawyer complicate getting what's rightfully ours? If it was their mistake, we should hold them accountable. We lost everything, Julian. An innocent man would be screaming for justice." I leaned back on the couch, projecting an aura of calm I did not feel. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but I kept my hands steady in my lap. Behind the partially closed door to the office, I knew Sarah was listening, the camera on her phone capturing every detail. "It's just not that simple," he stammered, running a hand through his hair. These big corporations, they have teams of lawyers. They'll drag it out for years. My way is faster. Your way isn't working, I countered softly. It's been weeks. You keep saying you're making progress, but we're still sleeping in my friend's guest room. We have no home, no money. I think it's time we tried my way. He looked at the paper again, then back at me, a cornered animal. I won't sign it, he said, his voice low and hard. It's a stupid idea. Why, Julian? I pressed, keeping my tone even. Give me one good reason why you won't sign a document that could get us our life back. He was silent, his jaw clenched. He had no good reason, and we both knew it. I decided it was time to introduce the next piece of evidence. I reached into the folder beside me and pulled out a printed bank statement. I placed it on top of the affidavit. Maybe it's because you don't want anyone looking too closely at our finances, I said. For instance, at this secret account you've been funneling our money into for the last year. Almost $200,000. Where did that come from, Julian? His face went pale. The blood drained from his cheeks, leaving behind a sickly, grayish tint. That's my business account, he lied, his voice weak. For materials, cash flow. Really? I said, adding the credit card statements to the pile. Does your business require you to spend thousands of dollars on hotel rooms and jewelry? And who is Vanessa Dubois? Her name seems to come up a lot. He flinched as if I had struck him. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He was completely exposed, the web of his lies unraveling thread by thread. I wasn't finished. I placed the picture from Vanessa's social media on top of the statements, the champagne toast with his watch in full view. She seems very excited about your new dream home in Arizona, I said, my voice dripping with cold irony. Is this the new project you've been working on? The one you were lining up funding for? He finally broke. He slumped back into the couch, his entire body deflating as if his strings had been cut. The fight went out of him, replaced by a sullen, bitter resignation. You don't understand, he mumbled, staring at the damning pile of evidence on the table. I was drowning. The business was failing. I was going to lose everything. You mean we were going to lose everything, I corrected him. But you found a way out, didn't you? A plan where you didn't lose anything. A plan where you walked away with $200,000 and a new life, and I was left with nothing but ashes and debt. His head snapped up, a flash of his old arrogance returning. It wasn't supposed to be like this, the insurance money. It was supposed to be a clean break, enough for me to get started and enough for you to be comfortable. The company was supposed to pay out. It was a victimless crime. A victimless crime? I repeated, my voice rising for the first time, laced with the full force of my fury. You burned our home to the ground, you destroyed 15 years of our life, you stood next to me and pretended to be heartbroken while you were the one who lit the match. You looked me in the eye and lied every single day. Don't you dare talk to me about a victimless crime. I was your victim. Tears of rage streamed down my face. Just tell me why, Julian. The lies, the affair, all of it. Why? He finally looked at me, and for the first time I saw not a monster but a pathetic, weak man. I was bored, he said, his voice barely a whisper. I was bored with my life, with this town, with everything. Vanessa, she was exciting. She saw me as a success, not just the guy who fixes a leaky faucet. With her, I felt alive. I wanted a do-over. The fire, it was just a way to wipe the slate clean. He had confessed to the affair, to the financial deception, and most importantly, to the arson being part of his plan for a clean break. It was all there, captured on video. I took a deep, shuddering breath and stood up. You didn't just wipe the slate clean, Julian, I said, my voice cold and final. You just signed your own conviction. As if on cue, Sarah opened her office door, her phone held up, its red recording light glowing. Julian's eyes widened in horrified realization. At the same moment, there was a firm knock on the front door. I walked over and opened it. Investigator Davies stood on the porch, two uniformed officers behind him. He looked past me at Julian, who was still sitting on the couch, a portrait of utter defeat. Julian Croft, Investigator Davies said, his voice calm and official. You're under arrest for arson, insurance fraud, and reckless endangerment. Julian didn't resist. He didn't say another word. He just stood up and put his hands behind his back as the officers cuffed him. As they led him away, he looked back at me one last time, his expression a mixture of hatred and disbelief. He had thought he was the builder, the one who controlled the entire project. But in the end, he was just another lie, and his foundation had crumbled into dust. The aftermath of Julian's arrest was a whirlwind of legal proceedings and public humiliation, for him, not for me. The video of his confession was the prosecution's crown jewel. It was undeniable, irrefutable proof of his calculated cruelty. Faced with the evidence Sarah and I had compiled, and the recording of him admitting everything, Julian's high-priced lawyer quickly advised him to take a plea bargain. There would be no dramatic trial, no chance for him to spin his narrative. He pleaded guilty to arson and multiple counts of fraud. Vanessa, the ambitious interior designer, quickly distanced herself from him once the story broke. When investigators questioned her, she claimed she was just another one of his victims, a woman who had been lied to and manipulated. The wire transfer for the down payment on their dream house told a different story, however, and she found herself entangled in her own legal troubles related to the stolen funds. I never saw her again, and frankly, I never cared to. She was just a symptom of Julian's decay, not the cause. The sentencing was a quiet affair in a sterile courtroom. I sat in the back, a silent observer to the final chapter of my old life. Julian, dressed in a drab prison jumpsuit, looked gaunt and diminished. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a hollow shell of a man. The judge sentenced him to 10 years in state prison with eligibility for parole in 7. As he was led out of the courtroom, his eyes met mine for a fleeting second. There was no remorse in them, only a bitter resentment. He still saw himself as the victim. I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no pity, no lingering love, just the quiet, clean emptiness of a space that has been cleared of debris. With the criminal case resolved, I began the arduous process of rebuilding. There was no insurance money to fall back on, but the secret account Sarah had discovered, Julian's getaway fund, was seized as part of the legal proceedings. After a lengthy civil suit, the court awarded the entire sum to me as restitution. It wasn't the fortune our home had been worth, but it was enough. It was a start. It was poetic justice. The money he had stolen to erase me would now be the foundation of my new life. I never went back to the old property. The blackened ruins held too many ghosts. The land was seized by the bank to cover the loans Julian had taken out against it. I let it go. I didn't want anything that he had built. Instead, I used a portion of the restitution money to buy a small plot of land on the other side of town, a quiet piece of property with a few old oak trees. I didn't want a big house anymore. I had learned that the strength of a home isn't in its size or its grandeur, but in the honesty of its construction. I hired a young, talented female architect and worked with her to design a small, modest home. One with lots of windows to let in the light, a small garden where I could grow my own vegetables, and a cozy study filled with books that I owned, that I had chosen. It was a space that was entirely mine. My job at the Historical Society became my sanctuary. Preserving the past took on a new meaning. I understood now that history isn't just about triumphs and grand events. It's about survival, about the quiet resilience of people who endure loss and build again. My work grounded me, gave me a sense of purpose that had nothing to do with being someone's wife. Sarah remained my rock. Our friendship, forged in the crucible of this betrayal, became the truest and most stable structure in my life. We had faced the fire together and come out the other side stronger. One sunny afternoon, about a year after Julian's sentencing, I stood on the front porch of my new, nearly completed house. The scent of fresh-cut lumber and paint filled the air, the smell of a new beginning. Sarah was there with me, a bottle of champagne in her hand. "To new foundations," she said, raising her glass, "and to architects who know what they're doing." We clinked our glasses together. The sound was clear and bright. I looked out at the old oak trees, their leaves rustling in the breeze, and I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. Julian had tried to turn my life to ash, to leave me with nothing. He thought the fire would be the end of my story, but he was wrong. The fire wasn't the end. It was the clearing. It burned away the lies, the deceit, and the life that was never truly mine. From those ashes, I learned that I could build my own foundation, one based not on a man's promises, but on my own strength. And this time, I was building something that no one could ever burn down.